So let's start with inclusion. So as we know, inclusion involves the entire community, including educators, administrators, families, and students, all working together to support the three types of inclusion, which would be academic, physical, and social. All of that inclusion together, working together, should be supporting our vision and goal that our school comes up with. Every school and every community is going to have a different goal and vision that they are working towards, so this is going to look different for everybody. Our inclusion components, which is academic, which we've talked about a lot in the last 3 days, physical inclusion, and social inclusion. All super important components of inclusion that are going to lead us into our next step, which is UDL. As we know, inclusion promotes social emotional growth for all students, academic achievement for all students. Doesn't matter what your ability is, or where you live, or anything of that nature. So let's do a little bit of a recap on universal design for learning. And I know I'm speeding through this first part because we've gone over it so much. And I know most of you came here for push-in service models, right? So let's just do this little recap and go on, but let's get in the mindset first. So I'm going to start with Shelley Moore. I'm sure everyone's familiar with her. She's one of my favorites, and this is one of my most favorite ways that she describes universal design for learning without describing universal design for learning, which supports what I'm going to get into.
Welcome to 5 more minutes. Useful videos in about 5 minutes that support the teaching and learning of all students. I'm your host, Shelley Moore. Today's episode is called Let Them Eat Cake. Hello, my friends. So today we're talking about support. And for all of you who are in the special education field, you know that support is tricky because there just never feels like there's enough. But what if we could look at support differently? So to understand how support has historically been provided to students in schools, we have to understand where special education came from. You see, special education evolved out of the medical model. And so if you think about the medical field, what has often happened is this. There's an illness or something's wrong or you break your leg, there's a problem. And so what we do is we go to the doctor and they fix us. It's great. The medical support is provided, but it relies on something being wrong or something needing to be fixed. In the physiological world, this might be accurate, but we're learning more about education and realizing a few things. First of all, students need support even when nothing is wrong. And second, kids aren't broken. So I was thinking about this and I was trying to imagine, well, what would be the alternative? And you know me, if I need to understand something better, I just try and think of a metaphor. Okay, so let's imagine this. Let's pretend that the medical model is a fresh batch of cupcakes, and the cupcakes represent supports. So for example, if you need reading support, you go eat from the reading cupcake. And if you need language support, you go to the language cupcake. There could be identity cupcakes, numeracy cupcakes, trauma cupcakes. I'm noticing a whole lot of sensory room cupcakes popping up. In the medical model, you don't get to eat from the cupcake unless you have evidence that you need it. And how we have figured out who needs it in education is by keeping track of kids who aren't successful. In other words, kids have to fail to eat from their cupcake. So then there's some kids who have multiple needs, and so then they have to eat from multiple cupcakes, but then they're never in the classroom. And then as our classrooms become more diverse and kids are negotiating more needs, then more kids need access to cupcakes. But the resources and fundings for the cupcakes are never increasing at the same rate as the demand. And so we're always short on resources. And what it ends up feeling like is a giant catch-22 where we're trying to feed starving children with 1-bite brownies. They're delicious, but they're so tiny. Okay, and then there is this huge misunderstanding that inclusion means, oh, no problem, let's just take away all the cupcakes. And then kids have been just thrown into classrooms without replacing any of that support, which is totally contaminating our inclusive efforts. Okay, let's just all take. Even the medical field is evolving to a better system. It's called prevention and wraparound support, and we can do the same in education. But to do this, we have to advocate for support. But we have to stop advocating for cupcakes. Instead, we need to advocate for more batter, because let me tell you, there are better ways to use the batter. Let me introduce you to the layered support cake of love. Imagine this: every classroom, every school, every district gets a cake. The size of the cake depends on the needs of the community. This is not an equality model, it's an equity model. But here's the best part: you do not need to fail to receive supports, because if you are in the community, you get a slice of the cake automatically. For every kid that's on an intervention list, there are 25 who aren't. And you can't tell me that all students are not going to benefit from supports designed to target language, literacy, numeracy, self-regulation, behavior, trauma, and all of the other needs that our kids are negotiating today. It harms no one to support them, my friends. It is wraparound support for the whole community, for the students, and for the teacher. We need to move away from this divide and conquering of the past. Let's come together by bringing support to the students based on the needs of a group. They can be designed for individuals, but they're available to all. One might even say that this is universal. Okay, so what does this look like for you? I want you to go back to your school community. Look around at your support services. Are they cupcakes or are they layered cakes? How could you start shifting some of these supports so that they become more universal in their approach? It's so much more supportive for classrooms, teachers, and students who will no longer have to wait for a crisis to finally get what they need. Just let them eat cake. Wasn't that just a delicious episode? Thanks for watching again. Go subscribe to our 5 More Minutes YouTube channel and find us on social media. We will see you soon. Welcome to 5 More Minutes.
I just love her, and I love the way she breaks things down. It's just so easy to digest, and it makes things more palatable for people who are new to this environment or for people who just want to see it in a different light, because we get so stuck in our mindset sometimes of like, I need to do this, I have standards to meet, I have tests to get ready, I have to write different, whatever essays or program plans or whatever you have to do. So it's nice to think about it outside the box and hear someone else's perspective, in my opinion. So I want us going forward to remember the multiple means of UDL: representation, action and expression, and engagement. And take our UDL mindset going forward. Remember that language is important. All students are our students. There aren't separate students within the school. They aren't your students or your students. They're all our students. All students will succeed. Accessibility and accommodation support all learners. So it doesn't matter if they're necessary or they're in a plan for you. They could be helpful to you. And there's no finish line. Inclusion is a journey. You don't end somewhere. It's an ever evolving, ever growing process that's always going to be changing with each new school year, each new student, each new admin, different teachers, all sorts of things. Why do I keep? Remember that universal design for learning is everywhere. On here, this mentions auditorium, gym, cafeteria, hallways, all the places in school. But I want to think outside the box here, because universal design for learning isn't just at school. It should be in the community as well. This should be going into colleges. This should be going into parks. This should be going into jobs and workplaces, and accessibility for transportation. All sorts of things in this world should be thought of in a UDL mindset. Sorry, you guys, I keep messing up with my buttons. And remember to consider all your stakeholders going forward: your students, your educators, and your families. And let's get into the meat and potatoes of it. So push-in services benefit all students. Coming in with our inclusive mindset and knowing UDL practices we know that one of the first things that you can do in a school is do, ah, golly, co-teaching, right? Another thing that you can do is therapist or interventionist-led lessons. Another thing you can do is the interventionist or therapist assist with the lessons. Why am I having a hard time with that word? I'm so sorry, everyone. Therapist leads unique activities, pull aside, one-to-one or small group therapy, or interventions adapt class materials. Now that all sounds like co-teaching to me, so we'll just go through some co-teaching models. Why? So co-teaching models that we know are, reinforced teaching, parallel teaching, going into stations, team teaching, and these are the four basic parts of co-teaching, or six basic parts of co-teaching. And part of the reason why, how do I explain this the best way? We think of co-teaching oftentimes as just you and another teacher, right? We think that a teacher has to have someone has to have the credential to be your co-teacher in the classroom. That's not necessarily true. You could have a speech therapist or occupational therapist or a reading interventionist or a math interventionist. Any kind of person that has a specialty skill could also be co-teaching in your classroom. It doesn't need to be for the entire day. It doesn't need to be that you guys spend hours and hours and hours collaborating, but collaboration is super duper important. And collaboration can be done in numerous ways, especially when we have therapists and interventionists that travel to multiple schools and have caseloads that sometimes can exceed 100. Thinking of SLPs out there. And so there's other ways that you guys can communicate through like Google Docs or emails or setting up times to just do a quick conversation, sharing lesson plans. And that's how you can set up when it might be a best time for an interventionist to come into your classroom or other way around. Now, this is a little different than actual co-teaching models. Interventionist and therapist led lessons is when an interventionist will actually come in and take over the class for a little while, and they'll lead the lesson. They design the lesson, they make the lesson, and they come in and they teach it. Oftentimes it'll hit multiple kids within the classroom, and it'll support all students within. Interventionist and therapist assist with the lesson. This is when SLP or an OT or any other interventionist will come into your classroom and assist you with the lesson. I see this a lot happening with OTs that'll come in during come in during PE, or they'll come in during different times of the class and help with writing lessons, and they'll help with setting up how you can adjust your class for fluctuated seating. I've seen OTs come in and assist with certain kiddos and their stances. I've seen speech therapists come in and assist in many different ways. Keep pressing the wrong buttons, you guys. Okay. This is an OT talking about her experience and why it is important to her that push-in services happen and her experience with it. I just did a little clip of her so we can get a view of like an occupational therapist, like feelings about it.
I think the value of me being in the classroom has changed because instead of pulling them out and doing the 30 minutes of magic a week, it's much more beneficial to push in so that the aides and the classroom teacher can do the same techniques and the same modifications that I would have done in more of a pull-out situation. So rather than 30 minutes of OT a week, they're now getting OT techniques throughout the entire week. So there's more carryover and more consistency looking towards that independent functioning within the classroom.
That was just a quick bit on her.
I think
So part of the reason why I played her talking is because she mentions that her going into the classroom allows for her to model, not just for the students, but for the paraprofessionals and for the teacher. Oftentimes in a general education classroom, as we all know, we don't get access to an OT or we don't get access to a speech therapist. How many speech therapists and OTs do you see coming into general ed classrooms? Anybody? Do you see it a lot? Do you get it at your school? Excellent. You don't always get that. And how much do OTs and speech therapists and reading interventionists help with showing not just paraprofessionals, but showing other students how to communicate or how to assist students? So using their skill set, which is different than what my skill set would be as a trained educator or as an advocate, it would be to watch their techniques, watch what they've done, and then be able to implement it past the time that they're there. All right. So talking about therapists leading unique activities. This is one of my favorite ones. I have a couple therapist friends that like to go into the classroom. One in particularly who's a speech therapist, and she on her caseload right now, she's in a rural community. She has 267 people on her caseload. She is the only speech therapist that can do AAC for the entire county. So what she's done has gone into multiple different classrooms and designed lessons that are unique to be able to teach as many adults in the room her techniques to be able to spread amongst the schools. This has helped teachers learn skills and paraprofessionals learn skills that enable them to communicate with students who use different ways of communicating. Also, how to teach students how to be more interactive with each other. Then we have pull aside or one-to-one or small group therapy. I like to think of this one as when we are doing stations. Stations is when you doing our station work and having people come in and working with just 1 to 2 or small groups at a time and being able to work together in order for students to be able to access the therapist one-to-one and then work on some of the skills. What's one of the most common thing a SLP goal that you'll see? I see reciprocal communication for elementary school kids. That's the most common thing I see in the IEP. So being able to work in small groups and being able to work one-to-one, but within the classroom and integrate typically developing peers with those who have those goals has been helpful. Then the last one would be interventionist adapts class materials. We see this a lot where an occupational therapist might come in and put the bands on the chair, or they might come in and they put different kinds of Velcro on the sides of a table. There was a great training yesterday in upstairs that had these wonderful ladies doing occupational therapy that talked about how they use different tools within the classroom in order to support kids to access their education. And some of the things that they were talking about were different fidgets and different things that were easy modifications that would be able to be useful for all students within the classroom. So why are these things important to know, and how are they different than co-teaching? Well, number one, you don't need as much time to do push-in services as you do to do co-teaching with another teacher. Co-teaching with another teacher, that's an all-day thing that requires 2 teachers all the time whenever you're at school. And then with these strategies, with having your push-in services, you can work together, but in less periods of time. And oftentimes the therapist and or interventionist can hit more than one kid at a time and teach skills. Why is this important in the UDL? It's important in the UDL because you might have individual who could really benefit from learning how to enunciate with a speech therapist and learn a technique, but they're not getting that service or they don't qualify for that service. And it could help them build more confidence. It could also help teach modeling for kids who are very interested in learning how to talk to one of their friends using AAC. Someone that uses AAC might need more additional support, and having their friends learn how to use their AAC or talk to someone using AAC is super, super helpful within the classroom. What happens when we do the different things? Like when we take our kids out of the classroom, we're taking away the experience of other students learning the techniques, paraprofessionals learning the techniques, and teachers learning the techniques. Those techniques, when they're done in just private sessions, no one else gets to learn it. So what happens is you just get your speech therapy or your OT or your reading intervention for that 10 minutes. And that 10 minutes or 20 minutes isn't very long. And oftentimes, half of that's taken away just by walking down the hall or getting together. So it's much more beneficial to all when we do it in the classroom. Now, if we think about doing push-in services, not just for the easiest way to do push-in, let me rephrase that. The easiest way to do push-in is going to be with your elementary school students, right? You think about an elementary school class, you guys don't move classrooms. It's pretty easy for someone to come into a class. Well, it's not just for elementary school. It works great in multiple different arenas when you get into secondary school as well. You think about your OT being able to come in and seeing how you work in a math class, how you work in a PE class, or a speech therapist coming into an English class that could help lead. Maybe there was a wonderful instructor here the other day talking about Macbeth, and she would have her students perform Macbeth every day, or not every day when they were studying it, obviously. And so having a speech therapist coming in during that time might be great, or when they need to do pair work in different classes. This isn't limited. What I'm trying to say is that it's not limited to just elementary school. It can also be utilized in high school. And why it's important is that it's more time in the classroom. It's more access to the general education classes. It's more access to their peers, and it's less time away from what everyone else is doing and what children's rights are. So how many in this class or in here are secondary educators? How many are elementary? How many are therapists of some sort? How many are paraprofessionals? No? Okay. Anyone from non-school? Okay. How does everyone in this room work and live in California? How many people in this room support students with exceptional support needs? How many people in this room are familiar with WIC code 4502?
What is WIC code
Do
4502?
you know what WIC codes are?
No.
California's welfare and institutional codes. So WIC code 4502 is the California Disabilities Bill of Rights. And it outlines what people with developmental disabilities are entitled to in the state of California. And that code not only says that students should have access to the community, but they should have access to school, to medicine, to everything that you and I and everyone should be able to have access to. And that includes being in the general education as much as possible. So you think about the therapies being pulled out, like Shelley Moore said, someone that has exceptional support needs might need to get pulled out for 3 different therapies a day. And that takes away from their time with their peers, accessing what everyone else accesses, and being able to, have access to their basic human rights. And so getting away from the mindset of medical where you get pulled away push-in will support people to be able to access communities going forward. Why do I say that? Is because we learn in school how to adult, and we learn in school how we access the community. Part of the education process is to teach you how to go into the workforce, right? So when I go to work, I don't get pulled out every 5, 10, every hour. I don't have to step away. That isn't how life works. You have you have to think about how can we support people to be able to access it the same. And then not only are you teaching kids that, all of their peers going forward when they become adults are going to think of this as normal, and then UDL will go right into the community as a whole, going into adulthood. Does that make sense to everybody? Because school is a pathway to adulthood, in my opinion. I want to take away school to prison and school to adulthood. That is where I see things going, and I hope everyone here sees that value. Now, part of the thing that is important to remember when we're talking about push-in, and I know I kind of rushed through a little bit of that, partly because I was told I was only going to be presenting to 20, and you guys are a lot more than 20 people, and I got really, really nervous. So please forgive me for that. And I really want to talk about not only how push-in services can be useful to in the school setting, but push-in services can also go into when you graduate school and when you go into community settings. So being able to do, individuals with exceptional support needs might need services from the regional center, might need services from Medicaid, might need services from a doctor, and that's going to help push people forward, or that's going to help people. Having the access of just like everyone else is going to be more beneficial to those than it is telling people they have to go to a certain place, stay away from their community, go away from their family. Oftentimes, it will get out of the idea that people need to go to group homes and stuff of that nature, because people have the right to have access everywhere. So some of the things that I mentioned today are super important to me because of watching what has happened on one side to the other. As I said before, I worked in schools for 15 years before I joined the regional center system. So I went from teaching kids to advocating for kids. And I really thought that I was making a difference on both sides. And then I realized, wait, these two sides need to be collaborating. So what would it be like if the regional center or your social worker or your parent or whoever can come into the school and work directly with the school in order to make a support plan that's wraparound for you? So push-in services don't just rely on the therapist at the school. It also with outside resources. So I want to talk about some reflection questions, and I want everyone to kind of get into your own little groups, and I want you to think about these 3 questions. What strategies for push-in services do you already use? What strategies for push-in can you implement tomorrow? How do you envision cultivating a collaborative approach towards your school's inclusion journey? Think about those things. I'm going to give everyone about 8 minutes, and then we're going to do a little share around and see what everyone comes up with. So. How many? Welfare institution. Email them to Myra? I did. She should have them. Yeah, I can do it again. What? All right, everybody, let's come back together and share. I saw we had a few groups. I want to hear what everyone's already doing. I want to hear what people can do tomorrow. You have what? Awesome. So let me start with this section right here. I'm going to kind of point to different sections and maybe start on this side, go 1, 2, 3. Then in the middle, go to the far back middle, and we'll go around in like a S shape and everyone kind of share. Does that work for everybody? So let's start with this group. What was your conversation about?
Um, Hi, we are part of a full inclusion school. So we already do a lot of push-in. So either the RSPs, us or the paraeducators, they will go in and we will support the learning which is happening in the classroom. So we will pull out groups not only for with students with IEPs, but also we'll include students without IEPs within that group in order to, so we mostly create heterogeneous grouping. And one thing that we have been trying, it's been a struggle, it's been a challenge, is that having everybody on the same page. Sometimes it is a challenge for the general education teachers to understand what our role is in the education of the students. And that's what we were talking about with our colleagues, about how we can support that learning, because our role as teachers in a full inclusion school supporting the students is also something that needs to be conveyed to the general education teachers, and we were figuring out ways in order to do that, so that everybody is involved, everybody is on the same page, and there is a collaborative effort which will be of maximum benefit for the students.
Maybe show your whole staff the Let Them Eat Cake video. Do it at a staff meeting. Thank you. Anyone over here? Group? You guys don't want to share what you talked about? All right.
So I talked about specifically how much I've benefited from some of the push-in that has started in my school. It's not all the way there yet. There's still a lot of room for us to grow, but I know personally my knowledge of like AACs or working with a speech therapist has really grown just by watching them in the classrooms with the kids.
That works. Anyone else want to share? I saw the S didn't really work. That's fine. Okay. What about online?
So our friends online posted for question number 1, strategies already in use, differentiating with challenge math. For question number 2, strategies for tomorrow, executive functioning skills, a UDO goal in collaboration with a classroom teacher. And for the third one, cultivating a collaborative approach towards inclusion, life skills training for all students.
So to recap, I'm going to go back to this slide, to the beginning, because I want to talk about really ways that we can use this. And I know I kind of gave a description of what everything was, and my nerves were pretty high, and I kind of rambled through it pretty quick. So now that I've calmed down a bit. So co-teaching, As I said multiple times, lots of collaboration. Oftentimes, you're going to have to talk to a general education teacher about what that might look like, or as a general education teacher, talk to your educational specialist of what that might look like, how that might look like for just one lesson. And as the general education teacher, you might want to talk to your interventionist or your therapist about, hey, I want to do this lesson, share this lesson with them. You provide the lesson, and then they tweak it, and then you do it together. There's many different, this can be done with any lesson. Any lesson that you're doing for the day, a co-teacher can come in and teach with you. So an interventionist-led lesson. One of the big ones that I see to get used to having student that is beneficial for all students is having speech therapists come into the classroom and having a speech therapist lead either a reading assignment or having a speech therapist lead a monologue assignment or working in pairs. Your lesson book can look different for everybody. For math skills, having a math interventionist come in, or even having someone come in and helping lead the lesson. Math is a little tricky because you're going to want to have someone who knows math leading math lessons. I don't know why I said math. It's because I like it. So having a therapist assist with the lesson is going to have someone in particularly come in and support. So when you think about someone coming in and assisting with the lesson, you're going to have your therapist will come in and just wander around your classroom. You might not know who they're working with, and they kind of can help everyone in the class. They're available to all. They're there for maybe one or two students, but they might be able to use their skills and see little Johnny over there struggling and assist little Johnny while they're there while still meeting the goals of the other student. That is beneficial for a lot of teachers who might not be used to sharing the platform or not used to sharing their lessons and don't know how to quite share that someone else leads the lesson or co-teaching with someone else where that's foreign to them or they have a plan. It might be easier for someone to come in and assist. A unique activity, having an OT come in to any grade level and teaching a breathing activity can be extremely beneficial from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. That is a way where it can talk about regulation. I'm just using breathing activities as an example because it's the one that most people know with the balls. And that is not in a standard. That is not something that every teacher has to teach to, but it's a great tool for social emotional learning as well as just self-regulation, right? So having the OT teach that rather than the teacher teach that and the teacher step back and the teacher assists with the activity, that could be beneficial and it'll hit the goals that the student within the classroom needs to reach. As for the pull aside and the one-to-one group therapy, all of those things are pretty similar to what it would look like outside of the classroom, right? So you're just doing it within the classroom. You're thinking about when you have stations or when you can just come to a separate part of the classroom. And obviously, not all interventions or therapies are always going to be available or able to be pushed in on. Sometimes a therapy might be private. Sometimes a therapy might be done in a private setting. So I'm not saying that every single push in for everything. I'm absolutely not saying that. There's no way that, let's say, a physical therapist, sometimes physical therapy can have things that might be pretty private that they're working on, especially someone with complex needs. It might not be appropriate for a physical therapist to come in and work on leg movements back or doing interesting movements with the body, and it might be invasive. So that might be something that you do privately. So knowing what's appropriate to work with the students is important too, and not expecting that everything has to happen all at once. Start with one thing. It's a journey. You might not be able to just go in tomorrow and be like, okay, therapist, reading interventionist, come on, everybody, we're all going to be in my classroom tomorrow. That isn't realistic. There's no way that you're just going to be able to tackle all that at once, nor is it going to be appropriate. You might have someone in speech therapy that needs to have some private speech therapy lessons. Sometimes in speech therapy, you're working on things that are private, such as sounds with your swallowing and gurgling and different things that you don't want to do publicly and you don't want to bring a stigma to yourself. So it might be appropriate that those things are done outside. This isn't going to be an everyday, it's not going to be an all the time. It's for when it's appropriate and when it might be useful for all. So you want to think about this of how could this be beneficial for all the students in the classroom. I know that Johnny over here has a need for occupational therapy. I know that Johnny has big sensory needs. I think that having an occupational therapist who's working with Johnny come into my classroom and help assess for Johnny's needs while also keeping an eye out of what might be needed in my classroom, because I have little Kelly over here who can't sit still and is having a hard time regulating herself. That occupational therapist might be able to help me out in a pinch to kind of figure out how I can support Kelly, who isn't actually benefiting from is benefiting from the services because the OT's in there, but it's not in her. She doesn't have an IEP. She doesn't have a 504. Those kinds of services aren't necessarily on her plan, but they're helpful for Kelly, right? So I want you to take away from this some of the things, taking away the stigma of therapies, taking away the stigma of pulling kids out and taking them away from class. I want you to take away from this thinking about how you can use a therapist within your own school to support you. If you're in a 5th grade class or a 4th grade class and you can't get your kids to stay seated or you can't get your kids to focus, talk to your occupational therapist. If you're noticing that you're having a hard time with kids communicating with each other and you're noticing conversations aren't working quite reciprocally, ask your speech therapist, how can I make conversations within my classroom more effective? Work with the people that we have in our districts in order to support the kids that we have. One of the reasons why this is so important, one of the districts, and I'll use them as an example all day long because they're probably, they're very, they're very rural, and their staffing shortage has made the news across the state. And they are a small district. They only have 11 schools. They serve an entire county, and they have 196 open positions across the district. There are only 2,000 kids enrolled in the entire district, but they have 196 open positions. They don't have any paras. The few para that they do, but very, very few. And the few paras that they do have are being worked till they're very thin or assigned to individuals that need that one-to-one support for safety reasons or for medical reasons. So it's been imperative for the therapist to be able to come in and do push-in services. It's also helped the teachers. There's an exponentially large amount of teachers up there that I would say are novice. I don't like the word baby to describe teachers. They're just novice, and they're going to become credentialed, and they're going to stay in the field because we want teachers to feel supported. And getting those professionals to come into a novice teacher's classroom helps them build skills. So I think it's important as a community how we can support each other and then not drive people out of the profession. I use an extreme example of up north, but the staffing shortage is real across the United States, as we all know. There's a big exodus from teaching, and that's oftentimes because teachers feel like islands. But there's enough people in the community, in our school community, that if we work together and we find ways where we can support each other, it'll be more effective for teachers to stay in that career and for our next generation. So does anyone have any questions for me? Yes.
I haven't heard anything about how you include students in the compensation, maybe as part of the IEP team. Do they want to be, I know they have the push in, and the idea that the instructional support teacher to help other students in the classroom, but the student will know that he or she is receiving that push-in services. Have that conversation ever been discussed, how the student feels about having that person knowing it's really for him or her?
That is a great question. And if we're doing push-in strategies and taking into the account that some services should be done privately, then the student who's receiving services in the class, especially in elementary school, has no idea that they're receiving that service. No idea. They might. I mean, they should be. They should be a part of their IEP. They should know that they're getting, let's say, speech therapy. But when that speech therapist comes in, that speech therapist is treating all kids in the classroom the same. There's no There's no difference. That kid isn't being singled out. They're small groups, or they're leading the whole class, and the whole goal is being worked on in a group setting or seamlessly. Now, when they pull the kid out and it's the one-to-one, obviously the kid knows. But most of the time, especially elementary school kids, they're not aware. And if the speech therapist is in there, none of the students know that who that speech therapist is there for. It takes away the stigma of that speech therapist coming in the classroom, because that speech therapist is working with everyone in the class, not just one student. Absolutely. I think students should be going to their IEPs in kindergarten. I think you should bring your kid to your IEP at your C to B transition if that's when you get your first IEP. And I think a kid should be a part of the process as early as possible. But do they need to know how they're working on the goal? Does it need to be singled out? Not necessarily. Now, maybe when a kiddo needs one-to-one support, that needs to be more private. If that needs to be something more private, if it's more, and it's not going to be relevant to anyone else in the class or beneficial to anyone else in the class. I might not be going into the class as a speech therapist and talking about how to swallow properly for a whole entire class of second graders. That's not appropriate. That might be a private conversation. So there might be things that are private where you really know you're getting it. But in a push-in model, no one knows really who's being singled out. They shouldn't. It should be useful for everybody. Now, there can be some guesses, of course, and students are pretty, especially if let's say you have an OT coming in, let's use PT because I keep putting OTs on the stand. Let's say you have a physical therapist coming in and working with a kid specifically that has cerebral palsy in your classroom. And the physical therapist is coming in to assist during the times. The goal for the student is to get out of their wheelchair and into their walker to participate standing up for part of the day. Okay? The goal is to get at least 20 minutes out of the wheelchair every day. Yes, people are going to know that the physical therapist is in there to assist that individual. But the goal would be that physical therapist makes the rounds and the stigma of having that therapist coming in is gone away. And all kids have access to that physical therapist for a minute. And it can also answer questions about what they are doing to help kids understand the differences between each other. Not the private stuff. We're not going to talk about Johnny's goal, but we are going to talk about, oh, we're doing this so Johnny's safe getting up. This is so Johnny can stand like the rest of us. Can you show me how you stand? And then maybe help that student. Oh, I noticed that your toe was pointed in. Can you show me how you point your toe forward? And help work on your gait and little things that kiddo might not have had access to. Because we might not be looking for a kid that has their, I want to say pigeon-toed, and that is not what it's called, but inward toe. And that they might get that extra support because that physical therapist was in there actually working with little Johnny to get out of the chair. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Students with anxiety, depending on what we're working on. So a student with anxiety, what service are you seeing? Like a counselor coming into the classroom and talking about maybe his counselor comes in and starts doing social stories with the entire class about calmness and about how we can work on building up skills to be able to access the area around us and being able to do that, and works as the whole class about, talks to the whole class about certain social stories. That's one way a counselor could work on anxiety. Pre-talking to a student about it. You can even ask a student, though, who has anxiety, who's receiving a service for anxiety, such as counseling, do you want someone to come in and not know about it and to help assist the whole class? Or you can talk to them privately and ask them what they would want to. A student should have the choice of like, I want private time too. You're welcome. Anyone else? No? Okay. Oh, there was a question. I didn't see your hand. Now my nerves are good.
Thank you, Miss Annie. I do have a question about co-teaching. At our district, we're still working on becoming more inclusive. So a lot of the pushback or resistance from a lot of our staff is usually, I feel, or I've observed, is around the insecurity about receiving supports. So my question is, what can we do to show that our general education teachers, that we support them? Does this mean we will need more staffing so that every grade will have a co-teacher? I'm just curious because I've not seen it done. So this is why I'm asking.
So co-teaching is going to look different in every school, especially when it comes to funding. Many school districts, especially up where I live, cannot afford having 2 teachers for every single grade. They just can't. And so what I was talking about with co-teaching is having your services come in and take over for a lesson at a time or different chunks at a time. Now, if your school is able to afford and have, the best practice would be able to have 2 teachers in the classroom. I mean, even if you had to do split grades, if you did one first, second, third, something of that nature, and have the 2 teachers in there and support each other, that would be the best way. But that's an all day long. And that's a model designed for 2 credentialed teachers working together. This with push-in is talking about therapists or your intervention specialists coming in for short periods of time to be able to reach the goals of the students, but also provide their expertise to everybody. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions?
How do you recommend districts like incentivize teachers and therapists, interventionists to take on this like push in and co-teaching? Like, because a lot of it depends on them taking the initiative to plan it on their own, right? And if it's not incentivized, they may or may not do it, right? Because there's a lot of like leaving the discomfort of your own little RSP pullout classroom or letting go of some autonomy in your general ed classroom. So how would you recommend districts incentivize that practice?
So we have to start with small baby steps first. For many of our school districts, we have to start with small baby steps. So first start by introducing the topic to the school, and then start by slowly integrating and giving more time to teachers. And I know it's hard, giving opportunities for teachers to collaborate and to work together, build groups. Start a group within your school that is like your inclusion champions. Let's call them the inclusion champions. And it's going to be the sole group within your school that should help lead the way and model for the rest of the school for what it might look like. And use that as proof that this is how this works. And that's what I'm saying is Annie from Changing Perspectives. In my former position, I would tell you it's the law. And the schools need to start with the least restrictive environment, and that talking to admin, like, hey, this is how we can go to the least restrictive environment and the most inclusive practices by providing these supports within the classroom. That way they're getting more general education minutes and we're gonna reach the state goals, and CDE is gonna be happy with us. So there's 2 ways to go about it, but to get everyone on board, especially folks who are having a hard time, because you get into a pattern, right? And like I've been teaching, or say that I was teaching for 15 years, and I'm like, this is how I've done it for 15 years. Oh my gosh, this is so new. I'm not ready to learn this. I already have to do this, that, this, and another. Starting just small, little bits, coming up with a goal that everyone in your district can agree upon and what's going to work for your campus. It's not going to look the same on every campus. It really won't. Is that helpful? Yeah. Yeah, little bits, just bring it up.
So I just wanted to add on to what you're saying. I am an OT, and I used to do all pull out, and then I had an incentive for me to move to push in. I do mostly push in now. Was one student who didn't want to come out. He felt self-conscious when he came out, because I can tell you every time I pull a student out, all the other students in the classroom know who I'm there for. If I push in, sometimes they do, but not very often, because I am walking around, I'm helping all kids, and then I'm circling back to that kid, because they're about like 10, 15, maybe half the class I can help in different little ways. And so then once I pulled out or I pushed in for him, I'm like, okay, oh, look at my caseload. I could do that for how many more kids? And some kids, I have 2 or 3 kids in that classroom that I can hit in the same topic in the same time. So it's worked out. Yeah. I have a very small caseload. I do. It's only like 25, 30. Yeah, right.
But part of the benefits of push in too is that it goes longer. I just want to reiterate that again. It goes past the time that the OT is actually there. And OTs have, I'm using OT because you just talked to me. OTs have limited time as it is, and students, they have to reach goals just like teachers have to reach standards. And this makes it so kiddos can actually reach their goals because they're going to get more support from other entities that aren't just the OT speech, whoever it is providing it. So I want to thank you guys for coming to this presentation today, and I'm sorry it started off a little nerve-wracking. You guys are a lot larger than 20. If you can, on your way out, I'm going to give you guys a little survey to fill out, and I'm going to say thank you again. And if you have any questions, you can get a hold of me at Annie@cpne.org, and it was nice seeing you all. Thank you for coming.